Here, thank you so much for coming out. I know the traffic conditions were difficult. I'm sorry that we started a bit late, but people were trickling in. I think they were stuck in traffic. It's wonderful to see a lot of familiar faces, the returnees. Thank you for coming, and then of course all the newcomers. This is the third in our series of talks, ongoing series of talks on what we call the Pafuri Triangle or the Makuleke region, that northern wedge of Kruger between the Limpopo and the Luvuvu rivers, where we have the privilege of operating as Return Africa. And I know in this room there are quite a few what we call Pafuri lovers, people who have experienced the place and who've gone back again and again, because it is an extraordinary place, extraordinary for so many reasons. It has a very rich diversity, both in terms of the life that it sustains, the biodiversity. We always say we have almost 80% of Kruger's biodiversity in that 265 square kilometers in the far north of the park, which really, in the greater Kruger, is about 1% of the surface area of that. So it is extraordinary, the life that it sustains. And in our first talk, Jono Turner, who is here somewhere, he's in the back, spoke about the reasons for that diversity, which has to do with the geology, the climate of the area, diversity of life, but also of scenery, of landscape. So we have everything from Lana Gorge, the iconic Lana Gorge, where the Luvuvu cuts through the sandstones and makes really a canyon. And then the big floodplains, the two floodplains of the Limpopo in the north, and then the Luvuvu. The only true floodplains of certainly in the Kruger Park, which are of course a boon, a blessing, but also the greatest threat when that river comes down, when the Luvuvu comes down. Many of you will know that in 2013 January, Pafuri Camp, our flagship now, which we rebuilt, was severely damaged in one of those floods. And this year we've had a particularly bountiful season. We've had great rains that started after the horrible drought. It was really almost a desert at the end of November, and we've had wonderful rains, and they've transformed the place. You may know that we have that Makuleke, that triangle, is also a Ramsar site, protected under the Ramsar Treaty, which protects wetlands of global significance. And when it's in that arid phase, when it's dry and there's not a blade of grass, it's hard to believe. Jono has coined the term dry wetlands, arid wetlands. But when after this wonderful rain that we've had, it just transforms, and now we have 30 plus pans that are brimming, and the life they sustain is quite extraordinary. So these talks that we arrange, where we invite experts like Stephan, who I'll introduce in a moment, really is part of that celebration of an extraordinary place. And for those interested, we are in the process of preparing a few booklets on different aspects. Again, it's with Jono's help, but we will be publishing booklets. The first three are in draft form. One's on the geology of the area, which really is the base for this extraordinary diversity. Another is on the wetlands, these wonderful wetlands, the two great rivers, and then all the pans that are associated with them. And the third is on birds, and there'll be a few others. And we'll be publishing them over the next year or so as part of what I call the celebration of a very special place. So thanks again for coming, and I now have the privilege of introducing our speaker this evening, Dr. Stephan Woodborne. I'm not going to go into your full CV, Stephan. I find it daunting, and I'd need spectacles. But Stephan is a PhD archaeologist who has developed this extraordinary long view of history, using really trees as a record of climate change. Is that right, Stephan? And as you'll know, those of you who've been to Pafuri, to our area, one of the many iconic sort of elements of Pafuri is its baobabs. These great, both in terms of the number of baobabs we have, but also the size of the baobabs. And we often speak about our big baobab that many people who visit the area go to. It's we once measured its girth, and depending on how you measure it, it's over 50 meters in its circumference. So it's an extraordinary tree. But what one doesn't realize is that locked up in that tree is a history of the climate. And that is what Stephan has been able to unlock through his research. He's also worked on many other aspects of our area, and we hope to get him back to speak about another one of our icons, the Pell's fishing owl, or some other elements. But tonight we're talking about Baobabs and climate change.
I'm from Itemba Labs, where we're kind of the national geeks. We have particle accelerators, and I'm more comfortable driving a particle accelerator than speaking to the public. So what I want to do is ask you to please indulge me, so that this isn't going to be a lecture. This isn't going to be a conversation. I'm very happy for you to interrupt me if you don't understand what I'm saying. And I'm going to tell it as a story, and hopefully you will engage with it. And as I say, just interrupt if you don't get where I'm going. So the story is going to start with me introducing one of the stars of the show here. And look, back. This tree here, this is the lunar tree, which is situated up in the Limpopo area. It's in Venetia. And I just want to give you an idea of the scale of this tree. I don't know if you can see down on your left. There's a little mapani tree there. That's a pretty normal mapani tree. It's got 3 4-wheel drives parked underneath it. So that's probably the equivalent of a 7-story building, that tree. Okay, so that's the lunar tree, and I want you to remember that tree because that's going to come up in the course of the presentation. Okay, next slide, please. Okay, so what I'm going to talk about are going to be 3 aspects. When I say that I research baobabs, one of the most common questions is, how old are they? And you can go to Kruger and you can see a little sign that says 3,000 years and still growing. Don't believe it. We measure it. So I'm going to tell you about the age of the baobabs. And it's going to turn out that you can't study the age of the baobabs without understanding the architecture. So I'll tell you something about that as well. Then I'll tell you about the climate records that we're getting from the baobabs. And I'm going to finish off with a kind of sobering view of what's happening to our baobabs. So let's get the next one. The story that I want to start with is going to be based on what we discovered in this baobab. This is the Lebombo baobab. It's situated just inside Mozambique. So if you can see it here, just on the right-hand side here, there's a fence. That's the border between South Africa and Mozambique. So when we wanted to work on this tree, we took our passports and climbed under the fence. And but what I want you to notice about this tree, I don't know if you can see this huge crack here. Okay, next slide, please. There's a view of the tree from South Africa, and again, this is in winter when the leaves aren't there, and again you can notice that huge crack. And we started out saying, right, we're going to date this tree. So if you want to date the tree, next slide, please. We use a borer to go and take samples of the tree. So I'm just going to show you what the borer looks like. That's it. It's a hollow tube at the other end, at the far end. It's got a sharp front edge and a little screw thread. You put that edge against the tree and you start turning. There's a big handle that you use to turn it. And once this thing has been turned all the way into the tree, so that only that's sticking out, what it will have done is cut the wood so that this tube is full with like a dowel out of the tree. We then slide this gizmo here between the actual core that we've taken and the tube there, and that snaps off the sample at the far end, and it means that we can then turn the whole thing out, and it removes 1.5 meter sample out of the tree. Okay. So when we wanted to date the tree, we thought, this is really cool. We've got a tree that's hollow on the inside, which means that if we want to date it, we can date it by taking cores from the outside, going in, but we can also take cores from the inside, going out. And our expectation is that as you go further and further towards the center of the tree, the samples will get older and older. And that is surely what happened there, it happened there, it happened there, and it happened there. All the red samples, we would expect that the oldest part of the tree would be somewhere in the middle here. And as you take these cores and date them, they should get younger and younger as you go further into the tree. That's not what happened. So this got older and older. And if we had something getting older and older this way, older and older this way, it kind of argues that the center of the tree should be somewhere there. It also happened there. So the center of the tree also has to be there. And it had to be in several other places, and it just didn't make sense. And it took us a long time to try and sort of to reconcile this, and to work out that these big baobabs are not single-stem trees. These very big baobabs that you see are actually fused stems of multiple baobabs. And in this instance, you can see the numbering. We've identified the different stems there. So that was the first thing that we really had to work out. Once we had worked that out, it turns out that there's a lot of structural elements around these very old baobabs. Typically, you'll have multiple stems, anything up to, in the teens, a lot of stems, that fuse together, and from the outside, you wouldn't be able to see that these are separate stems. But they typically form these kind of ring structures. And we can go into what that means. I suspect that baobabs are one of the favorite things for elephants to trash. And if you've got this kind of ring structure, and an elephant comes and trashes the outside of the tree, well, you've still got bark structure on the inside that the elephants can't get to. And it's a mechanism that allows these trees to reach great age. Okay, next slide. The next problem that we encountered in trying to date these trees was a thing that we coined the stop growth, the growth stop phenomenon. Now, what I have plotted in this graph over here is one of my cores, a series of cores. So 0 would be the bark end of the core. This would be 60 centimeters into the tree. And on this axis, I've got the age, which we've calculated from radiocarbon analyses. And what we saw is that at the bark, you would expect the tree to be 0 years old. It's growing, it's alive right now. But sometimes, it was 1,000 years old, right there at the bark. It was already 1,000 years. Sometimes we'd go a few centimeters into the tree, and it was already 500 years. Sometimes you would go quite a long way into the tree, 20 centimeters, and then it would seem normal. It's going from 0, getting slightly older, and then it would jump almost 500 years, and then grow normally. So what this radiocarbon was telling us is that these trees stop growing, and they stop growing for up to 500 years. So I really hope that there's people at the back saying, no, this can't be true. But it turns out that there's a good reason for it. And I'm shifting now to a different baobab. This is the Gila Pan baobab, which has really meant, this is the star attraction of the baobabs up in Porphyry. No, back please. Okay. So I've got the footprint of the tree there, and you recognize we sampled it from different sides, and the question that we were trying to answer here was, how is it that a tree can stop growing for 500 years? Technically not possible. These trees put out leaves every year. How can it be 1,000 years this far into the tree? Not possible. Well, it's got to do with that multi-stem structure, and we can go to the next slide.
Sorry, just on the previous slide, yes. Are those graphs, are they all from the same trunk of trees?
No, that's from different trees. Yeah. Right. So those of you who have been up to the Porphyry area will recognize this as that very famous tree. And having spent a great deal of time staring at trees, as people who are passionate about baobabs do, it kind of occurred to me that maybe when you look into this cavity in the tree, maybe the shape on this side of the tree and the shape of that side of the tree match. Now, if you know this tree, the distance from this side of the cavity to that side of the cavity is something like 5 meters or 4 meters. So how can a tree move 4 or 5 meters? You can kind of get a hint at what's happening here. You can see that this stem kind of seems to be bent. So maybe it was originally straight and it's bent over. Maybe this one. Well, now we can just do this looking at photographs, but let's not do that. Let's do a serious job on this. I managed to get a collaborator out of Germany to bring a LiDAR. So a LiDAR is a laser scanner, and I don't know, you probably have heard about the sort of scanning technologies and stuff. We scanned the street. So we scanned it with 2 centimeter resolution, and we have a 3D model. Okay, next slide please. We have a 3D model of the street. So this is Yossi Bada, and there's his 3D scanner over there as well. And we scanned the street from various angles to get the shape of this thing. So we're going to try and match up this tree, the size of this cavity, using the scan. Now what I'm going to do, sorry, this is going to be awkward, but I have to go to my computer to show you what's going to happen next. Please carry on looking at the screen. Okay, so what we've done is we've chopped off all the little branches and the leaves, and we've got our 3D model here. And what we can do is rotate it. We can look into the cavity from above. We can, do whatever we want. And this model has allowed us to generate a 3D print. So the 3D prints, I'm just going to pass them around. You can take a look at them so it gives you an idea of what the tree's like. Okay, can we go? Other direction? Okay. One more. Righty. So now we can look at this footprint of this tree, and we're going to do some really in-depth analysis to demonstrate what's happening here. But what we can see is that this part of the cavity really does fit very well with this part of the cavity. And why would the stem move out over there? And the answer is there used to be a stem over there. Now we can go forward again. Next slide. Okay. So now we're looking into that little area of the baobab where I'm presuming that a stem has disappeared. And there you see like a little scar on the tree. And this is what we see. When these stems grow together, they leave a scar. And so we can start working out how these trees used to fit together. And they do move. And they do pull apart. And what this also means is that if you have 2 stems that are growing together, there's a certain point at which they stop growing because they can't grow anymore. The guy next door, is this still working? The guy next door is stopping you from growing. So they grow somewhere else. As soon as that stem dies, the tree can carry on growing again. So what we hypothesize at the moment is that there was a stem that was there. If anybody wants to, after the meeting, I can show you the details on the 3D models. And that stem prevented this stem inside from growing for 500 years. And that now we've got a reason why we can have this growth stop phenomenon. Okay, next slide. Okay, so now that we understand the architecture of the tree, we've got a good way of getting into understanding how old they are. We would have made some very big mistakes if we had assumed that if a tree's 1,000 years, 1 centimeter into it, well, 6 meters, it has to be several million years old.
Do multiple stems use the same root structure, or are they completely independent?
Good question that's not been answered.
Is it 1 tree or is it 6 trees?
Sorry?
Is it 1 tree or is it 6 trees?
Okay, in some of the trees that we've looked at, there have been people doing genetics. I don't do the genetics, but they are clonal in those trees. But it doesn't mean that all of them are like that, but at this stage. What's definitely true is that the different stems are different generations. So you can have the same genetic material, but the trees just put out a new stem every now and then. Every couple of 100 years, grow a new stem.
From the same root structure?
It pretty much must be.
Like a rhizome, yeah.
But I'm going to make some comments about that later on as well. Okay, so now that we know how the trees work, how old are they? And here I want to acknowledge the work that Adrian Petru from Romania has been doing. he's been running around Southern Africa dating these trees. And so, next slide. The 10th oldest tree in Southern Africa is 1,371. Now, that term BP relates to before present. And in radiocarbon terms, everybody knows the present is 1950. Okay? In radiocarbon terms, we're living in the year minus 67. Okay, so the 10th oldest baobab is 1,371 next. Number 9, 1,400 years next. 1,500 years. 1,500. 1,650. 1,700. You have to stop at 2 because we need a drum roll. Okay, so we're getting to now trees that are 2,000 years old. Drum roll. The oldest tree in Southern Africa, 2,500 years. Now, I also want you to consider this. The oldest part of the tree is that little thin bit. When the tree grew up and it was as thick as my finger, that's the oldest part. And when we use a blunt instrument like a borer, and we hope to get to the middle of the tree, we miss, more often than not. So we're not even getting the oldest part of the trees. So the real age of these trees is going to be a little bit bigger, a little bit older than this. Okay, so that's I beg your pardon? No, Glencoe is near Hoedspruit. Yeah.
Is that the one that rolled around in the road?
No, it's about 10 kilometers outside of Hoedspruit, but not the one with the wall around.
What about the open year of baobabs in Madagascar? How old is that?
Okay, so I'm going to show you in a moment the samples that we've taken. And we have worked on baobabs from Madagascar, and they are much younger than our trees. Very few of them go much beyond about 600 years. I mean, let's not kind of think that 600 is bad. It's just 2,500 sounds better. Okay, so now that we've kind of cleared that up, let's go on to the next thing. And this is, how do we get the climate record out of these trees? The traditional way in which climate is reconstructed from trees is to look at the widths of the rings. And you would take several trees, measure their ring widths, see how they match up, put together this kind of growth response of the trees to external climate. Next. Doesn't work. Not in South Africa. So we have to come up with an alternative method of getting a proxy for climate. I'm sorry, this is going to get a little bit geeky, but just stick with it. It's going to be like 1 or 2 slides. The mechanism that we're tracing when we track the climate in these trees is got to do with the way in which trees regulate water stress. So the baobabs at leaf level are transpiring water. Water's going from the roots out the leaves. At the same time, they're taking carbon dioxide in the leaves. Now, when the trees get water stressed, the lack of water in the leaves closes these little holes in the leaves called stomata. So that reduces the water loss, but it also reduces the carbon dioxide uptake. Now, when the tree is more water stressed, it's going to spend more time with the stomata closed. When it's less water stressed, more time with the stomata open. And that affects the amount of carbon-13 versus carbon-12 that is taken up by the tree. Sorry, I have to go there. It gets worse. There's an equation. Okay, so at any time that the tree is busy photosynthesizing, it's busy gathering up carbon-13 and carbon-12, and the ratio of the two, it really depends on how wet or dry it is. And the measurement that we use for that is called delta 13C. Don't worry about the equation. I just want to show you what the symbol looks like. So delta 13C is our proxy for rainfall. Next slide. Okay, so this is what the records look like. I've organized this with the delta 13C record on the y-axis, and I've organized it with the more negative values at the top and less negative at the bottom, because that is the way that rain works. So the top is wetter conditions, the bottom is drier conditions. And look at the time scale here. We're starting 1000 AD through to the present. So this is a 1,000-year record of rainfall variability. And I want you to focus at the moment on the blue record. That's the record that comes from Pafuri. It comprises 4 trees which we've put together. 3 of those come from the Makoleki region. And again, I want to acknowledge the support that we've had from the Makoleki and from from the fantastic team up in Pafuri. The second record that you can see here is from Mapungubwe. Now Mapungubwe is only about 200 kilometers away from Pafuri, but it's drier. And so what you can see is that the red record sits below the blue record. Now, there's a couple of patterns in this, and you don't need to, there's no test, you don't have to remember this. But I want to show you something. At some point in the past, there was a lot more water in the Pafuri area. Then, somewhere around here, 1600, it got drier. Over here, around about 1800, it got very dry. Now, does anybody know what the year 1816 is? The Difekane. That drought that you see there in Pafuri, that's the driest conditions that exist in that tree for the last 1,000 years, in that tree record. That drought lasted for 40 years. And it was the equivalent of an El Nino. So it's like a 40-year El Nino. No wonder things were hard in southern Africa at the time. We've got records that says that drought spread was all the way from KwaZulu-Natal all the way up to Botswana. So it was a widespread, very serious drought. No wonder things went wrong.
Stephan, can I ask you, have you correlated that to the decline of Tulumela? Tulumela is an old stone city just south of the Liverpool, which is related to Great Zimbabwe.
Yes.
That declined somewhere in the 17th century, so it looks as though there might be a drought that was associated with that period as well.
Yes. Okay. I've got a slide later on that I can show you. I wasn't going to show it, but let me just give you a tour of the archaeology that you see in this picture. Right over here is boom time for Mapungubwe. Wet conditions in the Limpopo Valley. You can't really see it very clearly, but there's a period of about 3 or 4 years drought. That was the end of Mapungubwe. Power shifted to Great Zimbabwe. This period over here where it gets very nice and wet, Great Zimbabwe was the ruling kingdom. Then you see it get dry here. That's the end of Great Zimbabwe. When Great Zimbabwe disintegrates, you start getting these satellite states, of which Tulumela is one of them. So Tulumela was a response to the loss of power of Great Zimbabwe. And it occurs here during the little, so this dry period here is called the Little Ice Age. Okay. Right. Before we go on. Yeah, this is the effect of us burning coal. If you correct that, it comes out level. Okay, the other thing that I want you to want you to see in this record is that sometimes Mapungubwe looks like Pafuri, like that, and the rest of the time it doesn't. And just keep that in your mind because I'm going to come back to that. Okay, let me just also show you. We can take the last part of the record, and this is the record from Mapungubwe, and we can compare it to the instrumental rainfall record to see, are we getting a rainfall record? So in yellow you've got rainfall, in red you've got our carbon isoepoxy. Seems to match. Okay, next slide.
Sorry, at the end of your graph there, the red line is way above the blue. So what's happening there?
This. That was the infamous year 2000. So I love it that there's a conversation. You see, we can pick up that was a cyclone. That was probably also a cyclone. So was that. Okay, next slide. Okay, so we've gone out and we've measured now lots of trees. We've got a record that from up here on the Angola-Namibia border. That's 1,000 years long from Baobabs. We've got a whole transect of Baobabs through Botswana. There's Mapungubwe, Pafuri. I haven't shown it here, but we've got a transect of Baobabs along the southwestern side of Madagascar. And we're generating lots of records. getting to that. Okay, so we've got lots and lots of records, and I don't want you to look at this and try and make sense of it, because maybe there's one thing you can take from looking at all these records together is it's complicated. Okay.
Sorry. The very big baobab forests up in southern Tanzania. You obviously haven't covered that. So is it possible that there'd be older trees up there?
So Adrian Petru, who did the dating on these other trees, has been there. And they grow very fast there because it's wetter.
Yeah.
And so they're bigger.
To die earlier.
Yeah, but they're not as old. Okay. We realized that, well, this climate stuff's really kind of getting to be quite cool, but we're limited looking just at baobab. So we decided, it's really tough life being a scientist, to drive from the north to the south of Botswana and sample other trees as well. So in the north we sampled baobabs, in the south we were sampling camel thorns. And it turns out that you can use camel thorns. And down here from this area, we've got yellowwoods, 1,000-year-old yellowwood. And we haven't analyzed these trees, but that's a 1,000-year yellowwood from the Southern Cape as well. Okay, so we're getting a good time-space reconstruction of rainfall variability for the last 1,000 years from all of these records. Now, what do you do with it? I mean, the first thing is, I'm an archaeologist. Look at the archaeology, and I've really gone over that. Another thing that you can do, and here I'm going to move on to the more sort of hard science climate stuff, is we can use this to test those climate models that are forecasting the future climates. So you all heard about the forecasts for climate change, and they are forecasting climate that is way more extreme than anything that has been measured in the last 100 years. So in Southern Africa, we've got an instrumental record, and we know kind of how climate has varied. What will happen in the future is worse than any of that. But it means that we can't calibrate the climate model except for this little window of 100 years of data. With this data set, we've got 1,000 years of data, and we've got good spatial coverage. And so I've been collaborating with people in Stockholm, a lady called Chong Zhang, and she has run one of these climate models for the last 1,000 years. And that model produces a rainfall output which we can compare with these records. Now, let's go to the next slide. So one of the things that becomes problematic is that the way in which these models work is not, it's not as deterministic as everybody thinks. We know, for example, that rainfall in Southern Africa is strongly controlled by El Niños. So, yeah, if anybody didn't notice a drought last year, it was El Niño. The problem with these models is that they generate El Niños. So we do have El Niños recorded in the last 1,000 years in the model, but it doesn't happen at exactly the same time as the El Niños that really happen. It messes up everything. So we've got to ask a different set of questions of the model. So what I did was extracted from the tree records, from the baobabs, this delta 13C. That's the high frequency variability which we know is driven by El Niño. And I've compared it here with an El Niño reconstruction from somewhere else. El Niño is the same everywhere around the world, so you reconstruct in one place, you reconstruct it everywhere. Now, I don't expect there to be a good match between these at this stage, but it informs me of what kind of question to ask of the model. So, in the model, I asked for the Niño 3-4 index. That's an indicator of do you have an El Niño or La Niña. Calculate that for every year for 1,000 years, and correlate that with rainfall in the whole world. And what we see here is that these blue colors over Southern Africa says that there's a negative correlation between El Niño in the model and rainfall. So that's indicating that Southern Africa gets dry during El Niño. So that was my first test of the climate model. Does it get El Niño right? Yes, it does. Next slide. The next thing that I wanted to test in the models is based on satellite analysis of where clouds sit. If you look at the cloud band over Southern Africa, our summer rain, the clouds sometimes sit there, sometimes there, sometimes there, sometimes there. And so you can see that there's almost like an east-west displacement of our rain. Now, when our clouds are displaced to the east, we've got a drought. And it was presumed that this was, by these authors, that this was driven by the temperature of the ocean in the southwest Indian Ocean. So, not a problem. We take Mapungubwe and Mapuri, those two records, and just subtract them one from the other. And that tells us, is it getting wetter on the Mapuri side or on the Mapungubwe side? So that differential between those two records that I showed you earlier is telling us, is the cloud band sitting left or right? And that's what I plotted over here in white. So delta 13C there is an indication of clouds left, clouds right. And what I plotted it with in red is the sea surface temperature. That's a reconstruction from corals from Madagascar. So what that's telling me is that, yes, the trees are indicating that our cloud band shifts east-west when sea surface temperatures vary. Does the model get that right? And so we did the same thing. We calculated the sea surface temperature in this region down here, south of Madagascar, over the 1,000 years, and we correlated that with a thing called outgoing long-wave radiation. It's an indication of where clouds are. And again, you see this horrible set of colors here. The blue here tells you that when sea surface temperature goes in one direction, it gets drier, and somewhere else it gets wetter, and vice versa. So if sea surface temperatures go in one direction, clouds move. Goes in the other direction, move back.
Sorry, can you clarify? So if the sea temperature rises, does it then get drier in South Africa, or in that section you're talking about?
Yes. So that's a really insightful question. Basically what happens is that when it warms up in the Agulhas system, you generate more moisture in the atmosphere because there's more heat in the ocean to evaporate the water. But that produces uplift immediately above the current. And when the air rises, it has to be replaced by air coming in. So the air starts to rise further off the shore here, producing offshore winds. So although there's more moisture in the air, it rains out at sea. And that's what we see with the position of the cloud bands. Okay, next slide. Okay, so this is my last challenge to the climate model. And it's based on kind of like a hunch. When you look at our rainfall in the summer rainfall area, it's controlled by this band of cloud that orientates northwest, southeast. If you go south to Cape Town, you don't get summer rain, you get winter rain. And that winter rain is brought by a system that lies to the south of the country. Okay. That system shifts north and south. And so the variability of the winter rainfall, Cape Town's in a drought now, it's because the westerlies don't bring enough rain. And my hunch was, if the westerlies move north and south, how does that affect summer rainfall? Is there coupling between our winter and summer rainfall areas? And so I looked at an index which looks at where the position of this westerly belt is. Now, this is a really amazing thing. Here's a map of the world viewed from the right direction. There's Africa, South America, sometimes Congo rugby. And this kind of pink band here is the westerly vortex. It's the westerly winds that go all the way around the world. And sometimes that vortex expands, and sometimes it contracts. And people looking at trees and ice records down in South America and onto the Antarctic Peninsula have calculated the position of the westerlies. And that's plotted here in the red. And that's an index called the Southern Annular Mode. And I plotted it on top of the tree record. Tree record, summer rainfall. Red record, Southern Annular Mode, winter rainfall. And they seem to be coupled. So there was another challenge that I could throw at the model and say, in the last 1,000 years, when the westerlies move, how does the rain respond? And what you see, whenever you see a bright red or a bright blue patch, it means that there's a strong correlation. And what this really is telling us is that the westerlies move north, gets more rain in the Western Cape, gets drier in the interior. That's exactly what we're seeing in the record there. So there are three challenges that I've thrown at the models, and they've got it right every time. Next slide. Those three modes of variability in our climate system are also the major drivers of our climate system. If you take El Nino, sea surface temperatures, and the westerlies, I'll bet that they drive 75 or 80% of the variability in rainfall. And if the models are getting them right, we better take those models seriously. These are the forecasts for future climate change over Southern Africa that were produced by Francois Engelbrecht at the CSIR. And some of these don't make good reading either. On the left is the temperature for the future. And you probably can't see the numbers, but that's 5. That patch there is going to see 5 degrees warming in the next 70 years. I presented this in Marne, and the land values just plummeted. This is the rainfall plot. Now, this is not a talk on climate change, the impact of climate change. But the problem is not to go and look and say, I live there, I'm fine because it's blue. Because it's going to affect a lot of people, and a lot of people are going to move. We really have to take climate change seriously. Okay, next slide. Right, I'm gonna start wrapping up now, and it's kind of a tragic story. This was the first baobab that I worked on, and this is the one below one of the lodges in Makule, and it fell over, and I was kind of delighted because I thought these things never fall over. This is once in a lifetime. I'm going to go and sample this. So that's what I did. Next slide. Not long afterwards, there was another tree that fell over. Next slide. And then another one. And I don't know if you're starting to pick up a trend here. What I thought was a really rare event is not such a rare event after all. The problem is that we don't have recruitment of young baobabs. So we're seeing baobabs falling and dying, but we're not seeing recruitment of baobabs. Next slide. And I think that this becomes even more problematic when you consider some of the oldest baobabs. You saw the list of the oldest baobabs. 6 of the top 10 old baobabs have fallen. So this is the Dorsland tree. I don't have my piece of paper, but Dorsland is one of those heavyweight trees. Number 2. Okay, number 2. Next slide. Woodborne, also on the list. Next. Chapman's baobab. 7th of January last year. Chapman's baobab fell over. Next slide. This year, the Sunland Sutton baobab. This was the biggest baobab in the country. And this is what it looked like a few years ago. And this whole stem over here, you can see, has fallen over. And we were there, not yesterday, the day before, looking at this. And in all likelihood, this whole tree is going to collapse. So, what's going on? Next slide. This is the Glencoe tree, another one of our top 10. Yeah? It fell over. Now, what's going on here? I'm not going to actually try and answer this. There's a lot of things that we can hypothesize. It can be, it can be some kind of fungal infection, it can be old age, it can be any number of things. And it's going to be really hard to test these things scientifically. But I do think that it's fairly kind of coincidental that you've got these millennial trees that are all collapsing within 10 years of one another. That doesn't make sense to me. My suspicion is that it's climate change. So on the rainfall records that I showed you, I've demonstrated that these trees can endure severe droughts for many years. So it's not drought. It's not drought alone. If we look at the temperature reconstruction for that dry period that I showed you in the climate record, it was cool. So the reason why those trees survived is it was cool and dry. What we're heading into now at the moment is hot and dry. And I'm just not sure that the trees can cope with it. But I might be wrong. Remember, if you go back to one of my early points and looking at the architecture, we know that these stems die. Some of the stems died 500 years ago. We can't blame climate change. Well, maybe we can. But it's not the same kind of thing. Next slide. But one of the possibilities is that this is just the way that it is for baobabs. So this is the Glencoe baobab. When it fell, it's growing in soft sand, so the roots didn't break. it just kind of slumped over, and the branch just touched the ground, and it's rooting, and the tree's growing. So that's 2 days ago. If you just go back, so that's what it looked like. You know, one of the stems died. You know, we lost one, but go forward again. The tree survived. And I think that is where I'm going to stop. Next slide. Yes, thank you. So about a month ago, I was up in Botswana, and does everybody recognize that? That's Baines Baobabs with water in the pan. Okay, does anybody have any questions?
I think you've answered it. What you're also saying is that the climate changes between us and Europe and Asia are, in a sense, in sync. We're all going through hot and dry, etc. periods over the period of your research.
Yeah, so just for everybody's sake, the question is around the coupling between climate variability in southern Africa and elsewhere. And the answer is yes, it's coupled everywhere. Sometimes it responds in different directions, and this was something we were talking about earlier. The drought that's happening in East Africa and the wet conditions that we're experiencing now in southern Africa, those are coupled. We know what drives that, but the whole system is coupled.
So what do you predict?
Okay, can we need a chair?
Yeah. Should we start here and then there? Yeah.
A silly question. Do you prefer baobab with its leaves or without? I know what I prefer.
You know, when you love something, it doesn't matter.
Good answer. Question there.
So what do you predict for baobabs going forward in 100 years' time? From what you can see, what do you think?
Yeah, I wanted to try and be positive at the end.
Okay.
Look,
I'll withdraw my question.
look, there's research going into a thing called climate envelope modeling to say baobabs exist under these conditions, and we can actually look into the future models and say what's going to happen to baobabs in the sense, will they be able to survive? I actually think that that's not a very good way to go, because there's quite a lot happening. There's too many elephants in some areas that's crashing the baobabs, and there's a whole lot of other stresses on the system. But in southern Africa, I think that we are at the end of baobab recruitment. There's no new baobabs. We can only lose from them.
Why is that?
Why no recruitment?
Why no recruitment?
Yeah, okay. Recruitment is really the generation of new genetics from seed and fertilization of flowers. What you're seeing is clonal regeneration. So, yeah.
Sorry, but why no recruitment?
Okay. Brilliant question, which I can't answer. I've been working with Michelle Hofmeyer in the nursery at Skakuza. She took the pods from some of these baobabs, broke them open, and tried to germinate the seeds. She tried to germinate 1,000. Guess how many survived? 1,000. There's nothing wrong with the seeds. Yeah. So there's something else going on. We know for sure that in Kruger Park, elephants are just crashing everything. But where you have low elephant density, there are some youngish trees, but I just don't see the recruitment of these little guys this big.
I was wondering if you could dispel a myth for me. The fact that there's some school of thought that says that a baobab is perhaps the biggest succulent in the world as opposed to a tree, or whether it's actually a tree.
It's a succulent.
Thank you. Awesome.
And I don't know what the difference is between a succulent and a tree, but it's a succulent.
You don't know. There might be many an argument, so it's great.
Has any research been done on the roots of the baobab and how far they go down? I mean, do they go to talk about a 7-story baobab?
Yeah. So,
Just go down there, please.
so every time these baobabs fall over, we get to look at the upside down tree upside down. And we get to see their roots. Now, some of the smaller trees have a kind of root cavity no more than about 1 meter deep. The trees are really dependent on lateral root development. They're not stabilized by a taproot. It also affects their water use strategy because they have to intercept rainwater. They don't have a taproot that goes down to the water table, so they're reliant on the water every year because of those lateral roots.
In the lower Zambezi, I was told that the Acacia albedia also has the no recruitment issue. Is that sort of linked to the baobab, or would that be because of river stopping of the floodplains?
Okay, I can't really comment on the specifics of that, but if I can just give you an analogous argument, I'm the dating geek in the country, and for years I ran a laboratory where we dated things. Don't get me wrong. And one of the projects looked at the recruitment of Acacia areolobas in the Namib, and somebody turned up with a whole bunch of different size trees that we dated. And what we saw was very clear cohort recruitment. And you could trace it back and say, wet years, the trees recruit. Dry years, the seedlings can't get their roots down to the water before the dry season sets in. So we do see very strong climate-related recruitment. And if you go back to the 1,000-year records that I put up earlier, there's certain periods where you had way more recruitment than others. So you've got this kind of mega-scale cohort recruitment. And if you're looking at trees that are not recruiting now, is it because of now, or is it because sometime in the past there were conditions that were good for recruitment?
We do have someone in the room who works on the recruitment of albedas. He's not looking up, John, and on fever trees. Do you want to say something about fever tree and the albeda, the ana tree recruitment at Makuleke, and what you've learned?
Very, very simple at this stage, but my understanding is the experience from. My understanding is the experience from the lower Zambezi was very definitely that the recruitment of the ana trees is a function of the episodic event of the flooding of the Zambezi. And what has happened with the dam is while they may release water, they release it at the wrong times. So that what seems to have happened now is that you're getting that recruitment in a much narrower band along the river banks rather than in the whole floodplain. Fever trees, it would appear very definitely the recruitment is linked to the episodic event of flooding, and the historical situation in Makuleke, it seems to be, it's not so much scientific, but let's say anecdotal, supported by aerial photography and so on, very, very definitely linked to that episodic event, but linked to a couple of other things, and one of those other things is the elephant. So what is complicating that analysis today, and that's where I'm involved, what is complicating it is that the elephant population has grown substantially, at least at the normal rate of Kruger, but in fact better than that, because in the early days before the Makuleke were moved, there were people there, and that affected the elephant population. So now, and I can't give you the definite answer, but there really is an effect of elephants on both the ana trees and the fever trees that seems to be affecting their current recruitment.
Thanks, Stephan. Any further questions? Yes.
Thanks for the really interesting presentation. Just want to know, can you use this data to predict these big flooding events? For instance, the Rubu, we had a big flood event in 2013, which is essentially on 200-year floods. Can you use that to sort of...
We'd love to have that prediction.
Less nervous when it starts raining.
I think that's a good question. The thing that drives those extreme events are these extratropical cyclones that come down the Mozambique Channel. And they are marching down there because the Mozambique Channel is the fastest warming ocean in the world. And I'm sorry to say this, the frequency of these extreme events is going to increase. We can't forecast it, but I can just tell you that the frequency will increase.
Is it soon? Thanks, Stephen. Thanks for a great talk. Have you considered correlating your data of whether it be temperature or rainfall with solar cycles, i.e. solar flares, because that information goes back into antiquity, unlike our temperature and barometric measurements, which are only 50 or 100 years old.
Yeah, and I want to go right back to the blue and red slide with the two records. Right at the beginning. That one. Okay, stop. Forward. Righty. Okay. This period here, that's called the Little Ice Age. That's the solar minimum.
1600s on.
Yeah. And so that the ultimate driver of these long-term variability cycles is solar forcing. In fact, those solar records, there's one of the minimum, there's another one, and there's another one over there. You can see it in the rainfall response.
Okay. And then major volcanic events such as Krakatoa, for example, that cooled the Earth for about 3 years. Are you able to get that resolution and pick up that sort of thing?
Well, okay, that was one of the things I went and looked for. And there's a couple of Krakatoa. I don't keep the date in my head, but the biggest one was 1816.
Wasn't Krakatoa a bit later than that? About
1867.
Yeah,
1867.
And there was a lot of claims that these droughts here were precipitated by that 1816 eruption. Man, I just can't keep the names of those volcanoes in my head.
There is another volcano. Yeah, you're right. There's another volcanic eruption there as well.
In this instance, it was just a coincidence, because you can see that this drying actually started well before 1816. So, in actual fact, I've not seen any evidence. Now, you also have to remember that most of those volcanoes are equatorial or northern hemisphere.
Yes, yeah. But while we're on the subject then, those volcanoes spewed out massive amounts of things like arsenic and lead isotopes as well, more than mankind's ever produced up until those dates. And in your mass spectrometry analysis of these cores, do you pick up, are you looking for any other isotopes at all that might peak as a result of, for example, volcanic eruptions?
No, we haven't. So to get these records, we were looking specifically at carbon. We now have the ability to measure heavy isotopes on the particle accelerator, so it's something we can, but the way that we would do this is not to measure 1,000 years of truth to see where the lead isotopes change. We would go and focus where we know there's an eruption and test that.
Yeah, but you do need a baseline as well too. So.
Yeah, so we'd measure from before to after.
Okay. Any further questions, comments? Yes.
Do all the baobab trees bear fruit?
No.
Male or female?
I don't know.
How do they reproduce?
This is heading in that direction of are they trees or are they succulents? I'm not a botanist, I'm an archaeologist, I'm sorry.
We'll park that one. One last one. Just on a practical note, after you've bored your holes in the tree, what do you plug it with to stop insect infestation or damage?
Yes.
Or does it just heal itself pretty quickly?
I'm glad you asked that. We seal the hole with a normal sealant that you can get from the nursery. And we've been back to those trees many times. And we've put a lot of holes into a lot of trees. And of all of the holes that I put into trees, there's only one that I can still see where I took the sample. The trees heal up completely. And you have to put this into the context of how these trees survive, what elephants do to them.
Yeah.
We're giving them a little pinprick with this thing. Elephants are really putting huge gashes and making them very vulnerable, but they survive. Sorry, I need to make another comment on that. the fact that these guys are succulents. When an elephant trashes a tree, we can go to it years later and that kind of wound has dried out, and there's a bit of dry wood there, and you rub it, and behind it the tree nodulates, and it forms like a new bark. Normal trees can't do that. So the baobabs can heal themselves.
Well, thank you very much, Stephan. I think I speak for all. It was absolutely fascinating. I mean, this long view that opens up over 1,000 years is absolutely fascinating, and it just opens a new perspective. And I must say, it's very cool, of course, and that little 3D model of yours is extraordinary. But thank you so much. That's given us a lot of food for thought. And yeah, thanks for making the time. Thanks for visiting us, and I hope you're going to be back often. And I hope we're going to entice you to speak about some of your other areas of interest in the next few months. We intend keeping this up. As I said, this is our third in this series, and there's so much more to discuss in this wonderful area. But thank you, Stephan. Thanks for making the time. While I'm thanking, I do have to thank my team as well. I've got some Samantha here. Most of you will know Samantha in one way or another. I've interacted with her, Samantha Dalle, and Sandra and Olivia. They are extraordinary. They've, Samantha, whether it's taking a reservations inquiry or organizing a wedding for 90 people with a bush dinner in the fever tree forest and a dozen planes coordinated landing at Pafuri in sometimes quite difficult conditions, or putting together an evening like tonight. She's done a sterling job, and we really rely very heavily on her. Thanks very much, guys, for the And then we'll send out an announcement for our next talk. We haven't yet scheduled a date, but it will be within the next few months. We intend keeping this up. And we will also inform you of our booklets as they are published over the next few months. And then just one or two last things. My baby is Return Africa, so I must tell you about a few of our sort of plans and developments at Pafuri. You'll know that Pafuri Camp is our flagship. It's right on that eroding edge of the Luvuvu, so we'll have to visit it while it's still there. But we are in the process of developing a few other things. We are upgrading Baobab Hill, our house, the old section ranger's house. So in May we're doing a renovation there. So those of you who have been to Baobab Hill, it'll still be there, it'll still have its privacy, it'll still have the old feel, but we are adding a few touches there. There were a few rough edges. And then something that we're very excited about, and again it's partly with Jono, we're starting this year with mountain biking at Pafuri. So we're actually doing cycling trails, and we've already sold most of them for this year. We're doing how many? 6 or 7 of them. There are a few places, so if anybody is interested in cycling, it's not a race. It's really experiencing this magnificent wilderness, which is Pafuri, but using a bicycle instead of your feet or a vehicle. And it means you can get into areas. We do some off-trail cycling as well, so you do go off-road, I should say, on some of but you can. It's an extraordinary way of experiencing a very special place. So we are doing cycling, and then I want to mention one other way, because it really is this place, this wilderness, and we want to keep it that way. But how do you get, when you visit Pafuri Camp and you go out on your game drives, you're probably seeing 10% of what the area offers. If you go on one of the walking trails, you see maybe 40%. But to get out really into it, we are doing full moon trails this year, where we actually take you out and you can sleep out in the bush. So sleep out under in the dry season, no tents, out, and you get into areas. I did it with Jonna and a few others in September, and it was absolutely magnificent. You get into areas in this wonderful place that I, in the 22 years that I've been involved there, had not yet visited. So again, it's another way of just making a very special place available to our visitors. So again, thank you everybody for coming out, for braving the rain and the traffic. We hope to see you next time. Please do return.